For our third way of solving systems, we are going to learn about elimination. And elimination is where we get rid of one of the variables by adding or subtracting the equations. So you have an option of whether you want to add or subtract. And I'll show you how to decipher how to choose that. So when we use elimination, you want your equations to be lined up. So for instance, here in example 1, we have the x's are lined up, the y's are lined up, and then those constants, that 34 and -4, are lined up. So the way we decide whether or not we're going to add or subtract is we look for whichever variable has the same coefficient with a different sign. Now, they don't always have the same coefficients, and we'll get into that later, but in this case, the x's have a coefficient of 2 and 4, so that's not very helpful right now. If we move over to the y's, we have a 3 and a -3. So if I add 3 plus -3, I would get 0. But if I subtracted, I would have 3 minus a -3, which would turn into 3 plus 3, which is 6. So this one I want to add because I want to get 0. I want it to go away right now. So we're going to add these two equations. So 2 plus 4 would be 6x. 3 plus a -3 would be 0, so that's gone, and we're not going to write anything here. Equals 34 plus a -4 would be 30. So then 6 times what is 30? Well, 6 times 5 is 30. So we already have our x value. So again, we're looking for that point where they cross, and we're putting, make sure you put your answers in the correct spots in the ordered pair. So x was 5. And then just like substitution, we're going to go back and substitute that into one of the two equations, and it doesn't matter which one. So I'm going to do 2 times 5 because x is 5 plus 3y equals 34. So 10 plus 3y equals 34. Then I'm going to minus 10 from both sides. And I'm going to have 3y equals 24. And 3 times what is 24? Well, that's 8. So y equals 8. Write that in my ordered pair. And I have my answer. So this way might be a little bit faster than substitution depending on how it's set up. All right, now here we have -8 and -8 for our coefficients for our x. And if I added them, -8 plus a -8 would be -16. But if I subtracted them, -8 minus a -8 would turn into +8. And that would be 0. So I could subtract them. The other thing that I could do is go through and times everything here by -1. And what that does is it's going to change all of our signs to a positive, so, or opposite. So we're going to keep the top one the same, not going to change anything. And then if I multiply everything in the second equation by -1, it's just going to make the opposite signs. That 10 would become negative. Then I could add. So if you want to always just think about adding with these, you can multiply as long as you multiply everything by the same number. We can change the signs so that we always add. I think it's easier that way because you don't have to worry about minusing a negative and getting messed up with that. So again, multiply everything by -1. It changes our signs, and then we can just add. So -8 plus 8 is going to give us 0, so that's gone. We're not going to write anything. And then -5 plus 9 is 4y, and 2 plus a -10 would be -8, and 4 times -2 would give us our -8. So for our answer, our y is -2. Then I can go back and plug that into one of the equations. I'm going to plug it in the top one. So I'm going to have -8x minus 5 times -2 equals 2. So simplify that. -5 times -2 would be a positive 10. And then I'm going to minus 10 from both sides. So I'm going to have -8x equals -8. And I know that negative 8 times 1 would leave me with negative 8. So x is 1. And our answer is 1, negative 2. For this one, our coefficients aren't the same for x and they aren't the same for y. But I see that the top y doesn't have a coefficient. So in order for it to cancel out, that coefficient there, right here, would need to be a negative 6 since the positive 6 is at the bottom. So what I can do is times everything by negative 6, and I would have negative 6 in front of that y. So I would have 24x when I multiply. I would have negative 6y. And then negative 7 times negative 6 would be a positive 42. And I don't need to change anything on the bottom. So I would just bring everything over. And then I can add. So 24 plus a negative 10 would be 14x. Negative 6 and positive 6y's would be gone, would be 0. And 42 plus 14 would be 56. Oops. And then we divide both sides by 14, or 14 times what is 56? And that would be 4. So our x is 4. And then we substitute that back into one of the two equations. And because there's no coefficient on the top y, I'm going to use that one because that means there's one less step. So negative 4 times 4 plus y would be negative 7. So this would be negative 16 plus something would give us negative 7. So we would have to add 16 to both sides. So 16, basically 16 minus 7 would be 9. So our y is 9, and our ordered pair is 4, 9. And for our last one, everything has coefficients, but none of them are friendly. We can't just change a sign or multiply one of the equations. We have to look at what we are working with here as far as coefficients, and what I suggest is picking the one that would make the smaller number. So we have a 2 and a 3 for our x coefficients. So something that would go in, that 2 goes into, that 3 goes into as well, would be 6. So I would have to make both of those coefficients 6, one negative and one positive. If I chose the y's, 4 and 3 both go into 12. So then I would have to multiply by something to make those both 12s. One positive, one negative. So you get to pick, it does not matter. You're going to get the same answer regardless. So again, there it goes with choices. So there's no one way that's right. You get to pick. So I'm just going to do the x's because they're in the front. So in order to make the top equation 6x, I would have to times by a 3. And in order to make the bottom 6x, I would have to multiply by 2. One of them has to be negative and one has to be positive. And you get to pick again. It does not matter. I'm going to pick the top one just because that negative 10 is a bigger number. The absolute value of 10 is 10, or negative 10 is 10. So I want that bigger number to be positive. So if I multiply it by a negative, it would become a positive. But again, it does not matter. You would get the same answers if you picked to put the negative at the 2. So now you're going to multiply everything on the top by negative 3. So we're going to have negative 6x, negative 12y, and a positive 30. For the bottom, we're going to have 6x and 6y, and negative 6 equals negative 6. So now we can add, and our x's would cancel. Negative 12 plus 6 would be negative 6y, and 30 plus negative 6 would be 24. And negative 6 times a negative 4 would give us the positive 24. So for our answer, y is negative 4. And then we're going to plug this back into one of our originals, and it doesn't matter which one. So I'm just going to pick the top one. So 2x plus 4 times negative 4 is going to give us negative 10. Then we simplify. 4 times negative 4 is negative 16 equals negative 10. Then I'm going to add 16 to both sides. So I have 2x equals 6. And then 2 times 3 would give us 6. So x is 3. So our ordered pair is 3, negative 4.